Hello, my name is Kyle, and I'm here at the Toronto Zoo, where it's our mission to connect people, animals, and conservation science to fight extinction. And we're here in the beautiful Canadian domain with our two female moose, Lily and Trilly. These guys are both about 7 years old. They're actually turning 7 in this June, so pretty soon. These guys are both twin sisters, so they came both from the same mother there. Moose are actually one of the largest deer species. They are the largest deer species at about, these guys weigh about 700 pounds, and males can weigh upwards of 8 to kind of 1,500 pounds. The main difference between the males and the females, despite the males being a little bit larger, the females don't actually grow any antlers. So males, just like every other deer species, they grow and they shed antlers depending on the time of year. But like a lot of things about the moose, their antlers are also a lot different than all the other deer species. Most deer species actually have kind of a sort of a branching pattern to their antlers. They have one kind of main bone with several branches kind of coming out of the antler, whereas moose, their antlers are kind of more shaped like your hand. They have kind of a central kind of scoop here with sort of prongs going off to the side, and scientists actually believe that that is to help funnel the sound of females in heat to the males' ears, because they can hear them from several kilometers. So they are pretty unique and pretty impressive, as they can stretch about 6 feet apart, so they're pretty large. Moose in the wild, they have a pretty unique diet as well. These guys are considered browsers, and as opposed to being grazers. So they most of their diet is consisting of woody materials. So they like things like leaves, bark, twigs, and kind of new growth on trees. They can't actually digest any sort of hay or any sort of grassy material, most of it anyway. So they have a pretty unique diet that way. Moose are also very, very dependent on sodium. So they get a lot of this sodium content from aquatic plants. So moose are very specially adapted to be able to get at these aquatic plants. They're very, very good swimmers. They're very tall, so they can wade in pretty deep. And unlike any other deer species, these guys are actually able to dive down to the bottom of some ponds and lakes and stuff like that to actually get at some of these aquatic plants. And they're actually able to eat when they're diving. So that's a pretty amazing adaptation. It's because of these factors that they're kind of they're pretty challenging to keep in captivity, just because of these unique diet adaptations. They need to eat around 70 pounds of food every single day when they're in the wild to actually sustain themselves. So as you can imagine, it's pretty hard to keep up with that amount of browse. So luckily our guys actually really like this sort of pellet that we have. It's a specially designed browser pellet. It's actually made of aspen bark and different sorts of vitamins and minerals such as sodium that really make up a lot of their diet. But that's just kind of one part of their diet, and the other part is actually browse and silage. And Ben is here to talk to you guys a little bit about that.
Okay. Well, hi guys, welcome aboard for today. So the Toronto Zoo has a really unique browse program. You can imagine with animals like this, you guys have already seen the giraffe out there. We feed a lot of this browse material. Now, if you're thinking about something in the winter time, right now it's still a little bit cold outside. The trees around us don't really have a lot of leaves on them, right? Everything hasn't woken up yet. So what we do at the Toronto Zoo, and we're fairly unique in this, is we make silage. And silage is basically compressing a lot of this tree material into a barrel like this here, and making sure that we can use it in the middle of winter to feed the animals at the zoo. It's a slight fermentation. I like to refer to it as a little bit of a kombucha for animals. It's a little hipster. It's not really alcoholic in the sense that it's a cider or something, but it's got enough to just keep it preserved. And so this stuff here is preserved. This is actually our poplar here, but we actually manufacture this at the zoo for the animals through the winter. So you've probably seen it at the giraffe exhibit, at the gorillas, and at the moose here. And that's what we'll actually do for a lot of it. Yeah. And so here, Kyle will keep going with it.
Yeah, so now that Ben's kind of given you an idea of what we actually feed this guys, this is actually some of the silage that I've been feeding off here. Our moose absolutely love it. Sometimes it's a little bit of an acquired taste, as well as a lot of other fermented things. You know, sometimes when you first drink it, it's not that great, but these guys over a little while have grown to absolutely love this stuff. They really do prefer it over their pellets, as you can see. Lily coming over here. So you can see actually right now, they actually have this specially designed nose. It's actually prehensile, so they can move it around, and they have really, really sensitive upper gums. I'll just get her up here. Sensitive upper gums that allow them to kind of tell what is kind of this material as opposed to this material, because they will, this is the kind of new growth that they really, really like. And this material they'll generally just eat the bark off of and leave the rest. You can kind of see she's going for this new stuff here. They're actually, although I can't open her mouth for obvious reasons, they actually don't really have any front teeth, and that's just because they don't really need them. They kind of use their nose to kind of shovel food back into their lower back incisors there, where they can really grind up this bark. So they have a lot of really special adaptations to allow them to just eat this browse. And that's kind of one of the reasons why they're so tall as well, is because they can actually reach this new growth on the trees without having to really stretch too far and wait till it falls, because they do really like it when it's fresh from the tree. So their habitat is also very, very specific, because, as I mentioned before, they do really need those aquatic plants. And that's why you guys see them a lot of times when you're on canoe trips or camping. Maybe you guys have seen them at places like Algonquin Park and stuff. That's because they do really need those water sources to get that sodium content. It also serves as a double sort of use. In the summer, they can use the water to really cool down because they are really, really well adapted to the cold. They're very poorly adapted to the heat. So one of the many questions we get all the time is, why are the moose at the back of the exhibit? Why are they always laying down in the summer? They're hard to see. That's because these guys are doing exactly what their wild counterparts would be doing in the summer. They find some shade, they find some of the water sources that we provide them, like misters, and then they hunker down and they wait until the hottest part of the day is gone. So if you guys come in the morning, that's really the best time to see these guys, because they have a double layer coat, very similar to what our polar bears actually have. They have an under layer that's sort of hollow hair fibers. That actually work to trap warm air inside, as well as that kind of coarse hair that you're kind of seeing on the moose right now, and that kind of keeps the wind off of them. They also have really, really thick skin, so these all kind of combined really make it them really adapted to those far northern environments where they're living, like northern North America, Europe, and Asia is really where you find almost all of the world's moose. So this kind of habitat is really, and where moose populations are spending a lot of their time is kind of changing right now. Although these guys are actually listed as least concern by the IUCN, these guys are still kind of threatened because things like global warming are really changing where moose can comfortably live due to the fact that they don't really like the extreme heat. And there's also a lot of factors like movement of white-tailed deer, because white-tailed deer actually bring a lot of diseases with them, and they also kind of compete on what the moose are eating. So this kind of drives the moose farther north. And then there's things like ticks, which is actually becoming a really, really big problem for moose in the north, because ticks are able to travel further and further north due to warming weather. And a moose as large as this, Lily and Trilly are both around 700 pounds, so they are often finding moose in the wild with up to 10,000 ticks on just a single moose. So ticks bring a lot of diseases with them, so this is really problematic for moose. So their habitat is definitely sort of shrinking, but they're adapting to it relatively well, it seems, so far. So maybe we'll look at some questions there. Their names are Lily and Trilly. You can tell them apart because Lily actually has a green tag on her left ear, and then Trilly just doesn't have a tag on that ear. These guys are about probably about 6'8" or so. They can get well over about 7 feet, 7'1", 7'2". Their noses are disguised shovels. That's a good way of putting it. Moose live for about 15 to 20 years. They have about 1 to 2 calves, and they stay with their mothers for about 10 months until the mother is actually ready to start breeding again. And then at that point, she kicks the calf off. These guys are both about 7 years old. They don't spit, no. You might have heard a couple of the grunting noises. They kind of make these kind of low grunting noises, but in the breeding season, they can make some higher pitched, pretty loud noises. The females don't grow antlers because they don't actually need to compete with other moose. They just kind of wait for the males to come. Males actually kind of compete for the females with their antlers. So the males with the largest antlers are actually the ones that generally gets the mate.
I did see a question earlier on about does any of that branches break their teeth or anything like that? These guys have really specially adapted teeth for this. And I even see questions about what does adaptive mean. A lot of this is just based on how you can kind of make the best use out of what you have available to you in your current environment. So when you're looking at those teeth, they're actually built to kind of process this material. You can see how she's chewing away at it. They love this material. Their teeth aren't like yours or mine, where we're kind of omnivores in the sense that we have to be highly variable. We lose a bit of that kind of structure associated with it and how they really can chew that material down and process it. So their teeth are really dense in that they're built to kind of crush and kind of push apart this browse material so that they're not gonna have it break like you or I. If I tried to eat a twig right now, it wouldn't do so well. But with these guys, they'll eat it for breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
Yeah, and they're also, the teeth are constantly growing. A lot of herbivores have continuously growing teeth, so they don't really have the same kind of sets like we do. So these guys, they'll have constantly growing teeth, and if they actually don't get this sort of browse, we'll need to go in and actually make sure their teeth are all even and everything like that.
And I see questions about do we look at tick prevention at the zoo? That's part of our big training protocol here. You can see how close we are with them now. We're really trying to make sure that we can inspect them, look them pretty closely over, and we do have some tick prevention stuff that we're using through the vets at the zoo, just to make sure these guys are getting the best welfare that we possibly can give them.
And these guys do actually shed a little bit. They'll shed that kind of top layer, and they'll be a little bit less bushy, especially around their neck. You can really see on Trilly right now that she's got a lot of hair around her neck. She'll kind of start to lose that as it gets a little bit warmer.
So a lot of I see some questions about enrichment there. These guys, they're really enriched by a lot of the food. When we look at the full branches, that browse material, I like to look at it as it's very ready-made enrichment for us. They have to kind of choose the components that they can eat and that they can't, right off of down to the bark and the leaf, depending on the type that they like. So that really engages them in the activity of eating and foraging for their food around the zoo. And that's why we think it's such a high priority to provide that material, especially through our nutrition center here. They do a great job of providing that material for the animals that we care for here.
And we don't always feed the silage and the browse in just kind of the trough right here or the rest of their food. We do have different feeders that we can give them that they'll actually need to stretch up, similar to what they would be doing in the wild to actually grab the silage and the browse.
Yeah, I see Jeff says there, are they soft? They are soft in certain areas. They're a little coarse overall for their hair. You got to think that coat is kind of built to keep in warmth, so they're not really built as these super soft animals.
Yeah, their faces are pretty soft. We're actually able to, over a little while, we've been able to train them to actually allow us to touch their faces because sometimes it does come in handy. Recently, Trilly had some sort of piece of dirt or a twig or something stuck in her eye, and we were actually able to completely willingly give her eye drops to actually put the eye drops in her eye every single day without... completely willingly on her terms. So it was really handy that we were able to train to be able to touch her face before that kind of stuff happened. How long are they pregnant for? It's about 250 days, I believe.
In terms of sociality, they do tend to be fairly independent of each other. You know, these girls have grown up with each other here. They're quite friendly with each other. You can see them both eating close together. They're talking to each other right now. Little sounds that you might not have heard at the zoo before. They don't vocalize that much, but when they do, it's incredibly cute. But yeah, they tend to be fairly independent in the wild. That's why you won't really see like a herd of moose all at once. They're very solitary animals.
Yeah, they're one of the few deer species that actually is solitary. Generally, there's herds of elk and there's multiple of like white-tailed deer and stuff, but moose are generally completely solitary unless it's breeding time or sometimes you see a mother and a calf together. These are the only two moose we have at the zoo, yeah. These guys are twin sisters. They're both born on the same day. They are really popular. Moose are pretty iconic Canadian animals, so we do get a lot of questions and people that come to the zoo just to see the moose.
I do see a lot of questions about their diet. How much do they eat in a day? We have an incredible nutrition team here with a nutritionist that actually is constantly looking at their diet and reevaluating. These guys will jump up and down seasonally. With a lot of that browse material, you know, you think about when the leaves are on trees and what time of year a lot of that material is present. They will jump up and down and change their food sources depending on that. So it's not exactly, we can't just narrow it down to an exact amount that they're going to eat. We're constantly reevaluating what they're eating and how they're doing based on their body condition, how healthy they are, what if they're clearing their plate just like you would at home. You know, if your toddler's not exactly eating everything, then you're going to go, okay, maybe we're feeding a little too much. We can kind of curve it around a little bit. And that's what's going on with them for food.
There's also a lot of questions about breeding male. We don't currently have a breeding male, and we're not really sure if that's going to be a plan in the future, but potentially. Yeah, so the tags are actually how we tell them apart. They look very, very similar, so it's easy just to be able to see a tag, very similar to like an earring, that we can kind of easily tell them apart. They don't currently have a pond or anything like that in their exhibit, but we do have a mister and a hose that we actually put into their exhibit when it is hot, and they'll actually go into the mud and the mister that we set up for them. All right, guys, thanks so much for joining myself, Lily, and Trilly down in the domain. Make sure you're tuning in at 1 o'clock to see some more Facebook Lives. Thanks, guys.